anyone else like to talk on this issue? Okay. Next one is under the category recommendations for water supply reliability, and a lot of this overlaps with our previous conversation, but Mr. Ray has tentatively identified one is consistent, two is premature relating to BDCP. Mr. Ray.
Yeah, I don't know that I need to say much more than the conversation that we've had. I think, the conversation about through Delta conveyance is an issue that does need to be resolved through the BDCP, and it will be analyzing the impacts of conveyance facilities of various sizes, and that's the time to wait for that. I do think they'll certainly be evaluating the alternatives of conveyance as well as other alternatives through the Delta.
My recollection is that in our responsible agency role, we already sent out either one or two letters to BDCP, and my recollection, Joe, refresh my memory, we said alternatives ought to include the 3,000 cubic feet per second facility that the Planning Conservation League came up with, and it's referenced in the executive summary of this report.
Yeah, I don't know that we said that one,
but that's
we
included.
did talk about alternatives,
yeah,
and in fact they are doing an alternative that does not include a conveyance facility, but is through Delta.
They are not looking at an alternative that is similar to the recommendation of the ESP, and I think that would be useful, which is our recommendation
to reduce habitat land also.
Our recommendation for the levee system, the key thing about that seismically improved levees on lowland in the lowland delta as a strategy that improves water supply reliability and allows for ecosystem restoration is not currently an alternative being looked at in the BDCP.
I believe they are looking at a through delta conveyance system, which includes significant improvements to levees.
It's not the expanded program that was outlined here.
There's a difference between the corridor concept and this concept of a general strengthening of the lowland.
Of all the levees in the delta.
Yeah. Not necessarily all, but the 300 to 600 mile recommendation of lowland levees is advocated as both a improving water supply reliability, ecosystem restoration, and protecting and enhancing the delta. And it's all those multiple benefits that make it such a strong strategy, and we think ought to be considered by the BDCP as an alternative.
Okay.
Has that been written up as a specific alternative and sent to BDCP? So
no, but we can do that.
Seems like now, if rather than have us do that, it would be useful if the commission actually. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn.
Well, no, look, I think we can be open about this. It is of no particular surprise that the water contractors to date have been, let's see, what would I use the word, reluctant at best to engage in a levees discussion other than levees directly surrounding the areas where physical activity would occur. It is no surprise and no secret that there have been many testy, albeit private exchanges and meetings going on the subject. This is what I hear anyway. I have willfully stayed away from any of those discussions. And most people tend to think that BDCP will do something on levees, but the what is entirely unclear. And one of our, thematics in the agency comments we've made to the Delta Protection Commission is, come on, gang, this is like water flows. You're going to have to deal with it up front, get to it, start working on it. And, let's not try to do this in the last 13 minutes before the deadline for adoption of BDCP. Yes. But probably a more focused and directed stuff. Let's see, I think Dr. Pike had put together one of his proposals on pieces of levees for BDCP, not related to your work, but obviously mirroring it in part or substantial parts. The Contra Costa Water Agency had talked about it, and we had testimony from your colleague Joe, who's executive director of one of the water districts down there, but I can't remember which one, in Contra Costa, on an isolated conveyance running from Antioch to somewhere, probably the pumps.
Yes.
that turned out to be handling water quality problem for that area. It wasn't Gary Gartrell, it was.
Darling.
That's right,
Gary
that's
Darling.
right. So we've seen variations of it, but they're usually, if I may be so gross, I am the center of the universe, start and work here, here's the problem you should solve for me, and the rest will be resolved in due time. So a more generic approach probably could be pretty useful. Pretty useful.
Mr. Chair, I just would comment on, just kind of reiterate what Jeff said a moment ago, and that is that I think as I emphasized yesterday, the levy investment strategy and our approach to that, I think, is key to any number of things we've talked about today, and certainly key to elements that either are before us or maybe before this council at a future date. And so I think, again, that's why I kind of emphasized, as I did yesterday, the importance of the levy strategy, because I think it does.
The burden on our staff to elucidate with clarity how the investment recommendations will be made, and behind those recommendations, how the levy standards that we're called upon to develop will be decided is very high, Joe. No, you. All right.
Mr. Chair, along with that clarity, I think it's important that one shouldn't constrain yourself with what the existing financial conditions are, but should look at what would be ideal and then look at what the limitations are that then drive you to trying to make the best use of scarce resources.
Are you really?
Because too often I think we have preconceived directions that preclude the consideration of the optimal and then can distort, as a result, the efficient allocation of scarce resources.
Let me think about that.
So, my impression of the legislative process is that policy committees essentially surrendered relevance when they just looked at what would be best and sent the bill on to the Appropriations Committee, which would decide what was possible.
But it strengthened your hand as chair of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate considerably.
It did. So I'd rather be an Appropriations Committee than a policy committee.
That's always been true, for a variety of reasons.
All right, you ex-senators, leave that. All right. Okay,